What's up, guys? We're going to be working on a 2012 Honda. We're going to be pulling the axle out of this thing today, so going to be something not too bad, but I actually got to get my hands dirty again in the shop, something I'm not used to over the last week. Obvious step one is to remove said wheel. Next, we're going to need to get our brake caliper up out of the way because we're going to need to get our entire spindle kind of loosened up from all our suspension components to get it up out of the way to be able to get our axle pushed through the backhand side. So we need to get our caliper off the back here first. I don't have enough sockets over here. All right, so before we rip off our caliper, we're going to want to loosen up our hose, and we've got something to be able to hang it with there, because we don't want to be hanging this heavy caliper from the brake hose and possibly ripping that out as well. There we go. Now we're going to want to get our rotor here off of the front, and to do that, unfortunately, they're going to have some screws that are put in from the factory that aren't really necessary, but we do need to get these off. They're not going to be necessary to really go back on, but we're going to be using the SP Tools impact driver. The screwdriver here also comes with 12 other bits between hex, flat, and Phillips. And find the hammerator. So for these, you're going to be able to use it in the forward and reverse function. And for you guys who haven't used these before, you're going to press it forward and you're going to rotate it the direction that you want it to go. So since we want it to go left, we're going to kind of push it in and then rotate it to the left. When you use this one, you're going to be pressing nice even amounts of pressure to the left hand side while you strike the back side of the tool. And then you can see the screw came free right there. And this one's pretty crusty. But quick impact and it comes real free. Very simple, easy tool that everybody needs to have in their box. And that never happens in Ohio, just letting you know. Rotors don't come off that easy. Southern things. All right, now we're gonna need to get off our axle nut right here. Thankfully, our new axle that we've got going on comes with a new nut, because you can see here how it has a little divot smacked into it that is staked in place so the axle nut does not rotate back off of the axle. So to be able to get this one off, we've got our 36 millimeter socket, 3/4 inch drive impact. Should make quick, easy this one. Like butter. Good stuff right there. Now we're gonna need to grab us a second hammer. Quick, easy tech tip for you guys. If you have one of your axles that are stuck into the hub unit, we don't want to be mushrooming out the end of the axle right here, especially if you're wanting to reuse it, the axle. In this circumstance, we're not reusing it, but I still wanted to be able to show it to you. You're going to get two hammers. One of them has to be a ball peen with a rounded end, and you can see how you kind of have a centering point to these axles. You're going to place that one right into the middle of that one right there. So when you smack it with a second hammer, it is not going to mushroom out the outside edges of your axle. See, we've driven it in. It is free from our hub unit when we need to remove that one. So that part, hard part there is done. Now what we're gonna have to do is free our spindle assembly from the strut and the lower control arm. So we're going to start needing to take our lower suspension bolts off here. Lower bolt out here, 17s on either side, and then our pinch bolt at the upper portion of the wishbone there as well. God, I am not used to working on these Southern cars.
What's that supposed to mean?
Coming apart like this. Like it's just falling apart. It's like it wants to come apart. How about that? Now what we're going to be doing is removing the lower ball joint from the lower control arm. Here in this area has a cotter pin, so we're going to grab our side snips here, bend our cotter pin back semi-straight at least. And then you're going to use your side cuts as a lever, pinch and pull as it's coming out. Then you get your cotter pin out. Of course, it won't come apart too easy. Now we've got to get our ball joint separated from the lower control arm here. Best idea if you don't have a 2-jaw press right here to press the lower ball joint out, you're going to be striking the control arm right about here to shock the ball joint free. We're able to move it there. To pry that about. And now you can see that our entire spindle is loose from the axle. And then there we have access to our axle. Last thing we're going to need to do is separate it from the mid shaft inside underneath the vehicle. Right in here is where the outer portion of the axle goes onto the mid portion of the shaft, and we're going to get a pry bar that has the availability to hammer onto the end of it. And then that has our axle loose from the inside portion of it. So you can see it's separated from the inside half shaft. All right, and then we're good and free. And then we do have quite a bit of looseness on our inside portion CV, so I think that's where our issue is going to be mostly. Now going back together is pretty much going to be the same thing. You can see on the inside of our axle here, there is a couple of keyed splines to it, but fortunately on the car it doesn't matter at all. They're all the same amount of splines anyways. So we're just going to be getting it fed onto the inner spline. Now when going back in, you're going to want to make sure that you go straight onto the axle, and you can use the axle itself to kind of hammer itself back onto the splines. Except for I can't see what I'm doing. All right, like that. So we've got the inner seated, and now our outer will be able to pull our spindle back out, seat it back into this area. Another good idea, if you've got a lot of rust and corrosion on the outer portion in your splines of your hub, get some kind of anti-seize in here on your splines. So if for some reason you have to take your hub apart later on, it'll be a lot easier. got the upper wishbone torqued normally. We've got our lower bolt and nut put back into the wishbone that goes through the bushing for our lower control arm. Now, one thing that you're going to want to make sure you do is not to tighten this one right away because of that bushing that's in the lower control arm. When you go to tighten this one, you want to make sure that you have the suspension in full jounced section. So you can either get a pull jack, which what we're going to do right now, get a screw jack and put it into its normal resting mode. Because if you tighten it right now and then you go to lower the vehicle, this is going to put a bind on that bushing, which will wear it out prematurely. You really don't want to do that. You'll probably have all kinds of squeaks and rattles then when you go to lower it anyway. So make sure you put the suspension into its normal riding mode before doing that. If you don't have any of those jacks, another thing you could do is put everything all together, leave that one bolt loose, lower the car so it's all the way on the ground, and then tighten that bolt up. After torquing down your nut for the end of the axle, you have that little divot in the front end of your axle. That is what you're going to need to stake down with a chisel. That's what we've got right here. You're going to want to do that because under heavy braking conditions or rocking back and forth, this nut may want to reverse back out. Not a good thing. And you can see there that we have it staked into place, so that nut is going nowhere. Where are you going?
You're going nowhere.
All right, let's get the rotor.
Rotor. Here I am.
I am the rotor, I am the rotor. Like I said before, you can choose to put these back on or not. Depends on what kind of state you work in, because if it was in Ohio, these things would have snapped off and we'd have never found them again. So we put one on just to hold back into place while we put our caliper back onto the rotor. Too many tools, not enough bolts. Perfect. And then the last thing we're going to do here is reattach our brake hose to the upper spindle. Good to go. Now we are all reassembled. The last thing you want to make sure before you kind of slap everything together and put your wheel back on is, since we had like our caliper sitting against our backing plate here, we're going to want to make sure that it's not touching our rotor, causing a scraping condition down the road. So we sound like we're good to go and not scraping anything. Yep, good. Now we're going to go ahead and put our wheel back on. Note, buy Kyle extra large gloves, not mediums. They're made for like Whopper Junior hands. And you're not going to want to torque those on massively with an impact, because normal torque spec on these are going to be about 100 foot-pounds. Now that we've got everything all torqued down on the vehicle, now of course what you're going to need to do is go and test drive it, because verifying your repair is definitely the most important part of the fix. So we're going to have Mr. Bill go for a test drive, make sure everything's fixed up, but looks like we're all done with the little axle project here today. Appreciate you guys stopping in. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to leave those down in the comments below. Well, this has been the Rust Belt Mechanic here at the SP Tools Garage. You guys need to grab a tool and get wrenching.